The window across the street was always lit at exactly 9:17 p.m. Ethan noticed it on a Tuesday. Not because he was looking for anything in particular, just because sleep hadn't come easy that night. Or the night before, or the week before that, if he was being honest. Insomnia had a way of stretching time into something shapeless. Hours didn't feel like hours anymore. They felt like long, quiet hallways with no doors. So he sat by the window of his small apartment, a chipped mug of coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the city breathe in its slow, uneven rhythm. That's when it happened. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the dark window across the street flickered to life. Not gradually, not like someone dimming a switch, it was instant. A warm, golden light filled the space behind the glass, soft but certain, like it had somewhere important to be. Ethan frowned slightly, glancing at the time on his phone. 9:17. He didn't think much of it at first, just coincidence. But the next night, when sleep slipped through his fingers again and he found himself back in the same chair, staring out at the same quiet street, it happened again. 9:17 p.m. the light came on. Exactly the same way, exactly the same time. That's when it became something else. Not just a moment, but a pattern. The apartment Ethan lived in wasn't much. A one-bedroom on the third floor of a building that had probably seen better decades. The walls were thin enough to hear your neighbors argue about groceries, rent, or things much heavier than either. The paint peeled in quiet corners. The radiator clicked like it was trying to remember how to work. But it was cheap. And after everything that had happened in the past year, cheap was all Ethan needed, or maybe all he deserved. He didn't decorate much. A couch, a table, a bed that always felt slightly too large for one person, and the chair by the window. That had become his place, not by intention, but by habit, because from there he could see the window. By the fourth night, he started waiting for it. He didn't tell himself he was, but at 9:15 his eyes would drift toward the street. At 9:16 he'd glance at his phone, and at 9:17 there it was. The light, always the same soft yellow glow, not too bright, not too dim, comforting, predictable, steady. Things Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. He began to wonder about the person inside. Who keeps time like that? Someone disciplined, someone lonely, someone holding on to routine because it's the only thing keeping everything else from falling apart. He leaned back in his chair one night, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," he muttered to himself, "that sounds about right." For a brief second, it felt like the window wasn't just something he was watching. It felt like something that understood him. Days passed, then weeks. The light never failed. Rainy nights when the streets turned slick and reflective like glass, the light came on. Cold evenings, when the wind pressed against the buildings like it was trying to get inside, the light came on. Even during a brief power flicker across the block, when everything went dark for a heartbeat, 9:17. The window lit up again, unshaken, reliable, like a promise no one had spoken out loud. Ethan started structuring his nights around it. Dinner, if he bothered, came earlier. Work emails were pushed aside. Even his restless pacing slowed as the time approached. Because for those few seconds, right before 9:17, there was something like anticipation. And when the light turned on, something like relief. It didn't fix anything, didn't change his situation, didn't bring back what he'd lost, but it filled the silence, just enough. He tried not to think about why it mattered so much. Tried not to connect it to the quiet absence that lingered in his apartment, to the second coffee mug he had never thrown away, to the side of the bed he still avoided sleeping on, to the conversations that ended too abruptly, or maybe not abruptly enough. Instead, he focused on the simple fact: at 9:17 p.m., somewhere across the street, someone turned on a light. And somehow that made the night feel less heavy. One evening, curiosity got the better of him. The light had just turned on, and Ethan leaned forward in his chair, squinting slightly. From this distance, he could only see shapes. A couch, maybe, a table, shadows shifting slightly against the walls, but no clear figure, no face, No confirmation that someone was actually there. Still, the light existed, which meant someone had to be behind it, right? He found himself imagining stories. Maybe it was an older woman, living alone, turning on the light as part of her nightly routine. Or a writer, sitting down at exactly the same time every night, chasing words that never quite came easy. Or someone like him. Someone trying to keep their world from unraveling by holding onto something small, something controlled, something certain. Whatever it is, Ethan said quietly one night, don't stop. The words slipped out before he could think about them. He let out a small, almost embarrassed laugh, talking to a window. That's where he was now. But still, the next night at 9:17, the light came on, and he felt that same quiet relief settle into his chest. It became their unspoken connection. No names, no faces. Just a shared moment in time, every night, without fail, until the night it didn't. It was subtle at first. 9:17 came and went. Ethan blinked, frowning slightly. Maybe his phone was off. 9:18. Nothing. He leaned forward, setting his mug down slowly. 9:19, still dark. A strange tension crept into his chest. Unfamiliar, unwelcome. 9:20. The window remained empty, cold, silent. No, he muttered under his breath, as if saying it out loud could change something, as if the world owed him this one small certainty. 9:21. Nothing. Ethan stood up without realizing he had. His eyes locked on the dark window like it might suddenly come to life if he just watched hard enough, like he could will it into existence. 9:22, still nothing. The street felt different, quieter. Heavier, like something had shifted in a way he couldn't explain. And for the first time in weeks, the silence in his apartment didn't feel manageable. It felt overwhelming. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. It's just a light, he told himself. Just a stupid light. But the words didn't land, didn't convince him. Because it had never really been about the light. It was about what it meant. Routine, presence, proof that somewhere someone was still showing up, every single night, and now they weren't. Ethan stayed by the window long after that, waiting, hoping, watching the dark glass like it might apologize, like it might come back. But it didn't. That night, sleep didn't come at all. Ethan didn't remember falling asleep. Only that at some point, the darkness in his apartment became too heavy to sit inside any longer, and his body finally gave in. When he woke up, the chair by the window felt colder than usual. Morning light spilled across the floor, dull and gray, like the day itself wasn't fully committed to showing up. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then he looked across the street. The window was dark. Of course it was. It was morning. Still, something about it felt different now. Like a place that had once meant something, and suddenly didn't. He made coffee out of habit, not desire. The machine hummed softly, filling the silence with something mechanical and predictable. But it wasn't the same. Not like 9:17. Nothing felt like that anymore. All day, his thoughts kept circling back. Maybe the person wasn't home. Maybe they were out. Maybe they forgot. People forget things all the time. Important things, small things, everything. By the afternoon, he had convinced himself it meant nothing. By evening, he knew he was lying. At 9:15 p.m., Ethan was already in the chair. He hadn't planned to be, hadn't told himself he'd wait. But there he was, eyes fixed, body still. Like if he moved too much, he might miss it. 9:16. His chest tightened slightly. 9:17, nothing, his jaw clenched. 9:18, still dark. Come on, he whispered, barely audible. 9:19, nothing. A quiet frustration built inside him, sharper than he expected. Not anger, something else, something closer to loss. By 9:25, he knew, whatever this was, it wasn't a one-time thing. That night, the silence felt louder than it ever had. Not empty, not calm. Just loud, like every thought he'd been avoiding suddenly had space to speak. The next day passed slower. Ethan found himself distracted, rereading the same emails, staring at the same lines without absorbing any of it. At one point, he opened a message and realized he'd been looking at it for 10 minutes without understanding a single word. So he closed his laptop, sat back, and stared at nothing. By late afternoon, the thought had already settled in his mind. He just hadn't admitted it yet. By 8:30 p.m., he was pacing, back and forth across his apartment, hands in his pockets, then not. Then running through his hair, then back in his pockets again. "This is stupid," he muttered. "You don't even know who lives there." But that wasn't the point, and he knew it. At 9:10, he grabbed his jacket. The hallway outside his apartment smelled faintly like old carpet and something fried from 2 floors down. The kind of smell that never really leaves. He barely noticed. Each step down the stairs felt heavier than it should have. Like his body wasn't entirely convinced this was a good idea. "Just a walk," he told himself quietly. Just a walk. Outside, the air was colder than he expected. It brushed against his face, sharp enough to wake him up a little, or maybe make him more aware. The street looked different from down here. Less distant, more real, the buildings taller, the shadows deeper. He crossed slowly, not rushing, like he still had time to change his mind. When he reached the other side, he stopped, looked up. There it was, the window, dark, still, unmoving. From this angle it felt closer, but somehow more unreachable. Ethan hesitated. His eyes dropped to the entrance of the building. An old door, scratched, worn, the kind of door 100 people had passed through without ever thinking twice about it. He thought about turning back, about how strange this probably looked. A grown man standing outside a building because a light didn't turn on, but his feet didn't move. Instead, he reached out and pushed the door open. The inside was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, just unused. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, dim lighting, muted colors. Everything slightly worn down by time. Ethan stepped inside slowly. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing more than it should have. "Okay," he exhaled under his breath. "You're here." He glanced around. Mailboxes lined one wall, some names faded, some missing entirely. He looked for anything familiar, a clue, a name. Something that could connect the light to a person. Nothing stood out. His eyes shifted toward the staircase. Then the elevator, old, probably unreliable. He chose the stairs. Each step creaked softly beneath his weight. The sound followed him up, like the building itself was aware of his presence. Second floor, quiet. Third floor, still quiet. Fourth floor, he slowed down. Based on the angle from his apartment, this should be it. His chest tightened slightly as he stepped onto the landing. A narrow hallway stretched out in both directions. Closed doors. No movement. No sound. Ethan walked carefully, counting doors, matching positions in his mind. Then he stopped. There it was, the door that should belong to the window. It looked ordinary, too ordinary. No light underneath, no sound inside, nothing to suggest anyone was home. Ethan stood there for a long moment, just staring. His hand lifted slightly, hovered near the door, then dropped. "What are you even going to say?" he whispered to himself. He almost laughed, almost turned around. But something held him there, that same feeling. The one that had kept him watching night after night. Finally he knocked, once, soft, no response. He waited, listened. Nothing. He knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. The silence pressed in around him, heavy, unmoving. Ethan exhaled slowly, stepping back. "Yeah," he murmured. "Of course." He turned, started walking back down the hallway. But just as he reached the stairs, he heard something. A faint sound. Behind him, he froze. Slowly, he turned back. The hallway was still empty. But the door he had just knocked on, was now slightly open. Just enough to notice. Just enough to change everything. Ethan didn't move at first. His eyes stayed locked on the door, barely open, just enough to reveal darkness behind it. He was sure of one thing. That door had been closed. Completely. He'd checked. Twice. "Hello," he called out, his voice cautious, unsure of how loud it should be in a place like this. No answer. The hallway remained still. No footsteps, no shifting shadows. No sign that anyone had opened it. Ethan swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Look, I'm sorry," he added, a little awkwardly. "I thought someone lived here." I mean, obviously someone does, he stopped. Because even as he said it, something felt off. No light, no sound, no presence. Slowly, he stepped closer. The door creaked slightly as he pushed it open a little more, the sound sharp in the silence. Hello! Still nothing. The air inside felt different, cooler, stiller. Like a space that hadn't been disturbed in a while. Ethan hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct told him this was where he should stop. Where a normal person would turn around, apologize to no one, and leave. But something else, something quieter, deeper, pushed him forward. He stepped inside. The apartment was dim, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the window. The same window. Ethan's eyes adjusted slowly. Shapes began to form. A couch. A small table. A chair near the window. His chest tightened slightly, because it looked familiar, not identical to his place, but close, too close. He took another step in. The floor creaked under his weight, the sound echoing softly through the space. "Anyone here?" he asked again, quieter this time. Silence answered back. The apartment didn't feel abandoned. But it didn't feel lived in either. It felt like something in between, like a paused moment. Ethan moved further inside, his gaze drifting toward the window, the one he had been watching for weeks. From here, his own apartment was visible, clear, unobstructed. He could see the chair by his window, the small table, even the faint outline of the mug he'd left behind. A strange feeling settled in his chest. "This is weird," he whispered. He turned slowly, taking in the rest of the room. Everything was neat, too neat, no clutter, no personal items. No signs of daily life. Except on the small table near the couch, there was a single object. Ethan stepped closer. His footsteps careful, measured. It was a notebook. Plain, dark cover. Slightly worn at the edges. He stared at it for a moment before reaching out. His fingers hovered just above it. "This is a bad idea," he murmured under his breath, but he picked it up anyway. It felt lighter than he expected. Used, but not old. He opened it slowly. The first page was blank, so was the second, but on the third there was writing. Ethan's breath caught slightly as he leaned in. It was neat, careful, deliberate, and at the top of the page a date, 2 weeks ago. Below it a single sentence. "The light turned on again tonight at 9:17. Ethan froze. A slow, creeping realization began to form in his mind. He flipped the page. Another entry, another date. Another line. He was there again, sitting by the window. Ethan's grip on the notebook tightened. His heart started to beat faster now, not from fear, not exactly, but from something deeper. Something unsettling. He turned another page. "I don't think he knows I can see him." The room suddenly felt smaller. Ethan glanced instinctively toward the window, toward his apartment, the chair. The place where he sat every night. Another page. Same time, same position, he looks tired. His chest tightened sharply now, another page. "I wonder what he's waiting for." Ethan exhaled slowly, but it didn't steady him. Another page. "Tonight," he spoke. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw his lips move. His mind flashed back. To the night he had said, "Whatever it is, don't stop." His hand trembled slightly as he turned the next page. I think the light comforts him. The air in the room felt heavier now, more real. More connected, another page. "It comforts me too." Ethan swallowed hard. For a long moment he just stood there, holding the notebook, breathing slowly, trying to understand what he was reading. This wasn't just someone living here. This was someone watching him, every night, just like he had been watching them. The silence in the apartment felt different now. Not empty, not still, shared. Ethan looked around again, but now the space didn't feel abandoned. It felt like someone had just stepped out, or worse, like they were still there, watching. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. Not because he wanted to stop reading, but because something inside him needed a second to catch up. The room felt different now, not empty, not silent, but aware. He set the notebook back on the table, carefully, almost respectfully, like it belonged to something fragile, or someone. "They were here," he whispered. The words sounded strange out loud, unfinished. His eyes drifted back to the window, to his apartment. From this side, everything looked so clear, so exposed. He could see the chair where he sat every night, the slight tilt of it toward the glass. The way his space looked from the outside. For the first time, he wasn't the one watching. He was the one being seen. A quiet discomfort settled in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to vulnerability. He stepped closer to the window, almost without thinking. "How long?" he murmured, the notebook, the entries, the observations, 2 weeks, at least, every night. At 9:17, his reflection faintly overlapped the view of his apartment in the glass. For a moment, it looked like 2 versions of him were standing there, one inside, one outside. Ethan exhaled slowly, stepping back. "This doesn't make sense," he said, running a hand through his hair. But it did, in a way he didn't want to admit. Loneliness had a way of creating strange connections, even silent ones, even unseen ones. He turned back toward the table, toward the notebook. His eyes lingered on it. Then he picked it up again. This time he flipped further ahead, past the entries he'd already read. The handwriting remained steady, careful, consistent. "He looks like he doesn't sleep much." Ethan let out a quiet breath. Tonight he didn't move for a long time, just sat there. Another page. "I think he's waiting for something or someone." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Another page. "I understand that feeling." His grip on the notebook softened. Another page. "I almost turned the light off tonight." Ethan froze. His eyes scanned the line again, slower this time. "I almost turned the light off tonight, but I didn't want him to feel alone." The words hit differently, heavier. A quiet emotion stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a while. Something close to being understood. He turned the page. "I wonder if he would notice if I stopped." Ethan swallowed hard. His mind flashed back to the empty window, to the silence, to the way his chest had tightened without explanation. Another page. "Maybe we're both just pretending not to need this." The room felt still again, but not cold, not distant, connected. Ethan closed the notebook halfway. His eyes unfocused for a moment, lost somewhere between memory and realization. "I noticed," he said quietly. The words barely left his lips. But they felt important, real. He opened the notebook again, carefully. This time he flipped to the last written page, the most recent entry, the date yesterday. Ethan's breath slowed as he read. "I didn't turn the light on tonight." His chest tightened instantly. "I wanted to see what would happen." A pause in the writing, like the person had taken time before finishing. Ethan leaned in slightly. Part of me hoped he wouldn't care. His fingers pressed slightly into the edge of the page. But another part of me, the sentence trailed for a moment, then continued on the next line. "Felt like something would go quiet in the world if I didn't." Ethan's throat felt tight now. Another line. "And maybe that's selfish." Another. "To matter to someone who doesn't even know you exist." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, because he did know that feeling. Too well. When he opened them again, there was one last line. Short, simple. "I think I needed the light too." Ethan stared at the words, longer than he needed to. Then slowly he lowered the notebook. The apartment felt heavier now, but not in a bad way. More like it was holding something, something shared, something unspoken. "They're not here," he said softly, and this time there was no question in his voice. Whoever had written this, whoever had been watching, they were gone. Ethan looked around the room again. The couch, the table, the chair near the window, all of it still, all of it quiet. But now it didn't feel empty. It felt like something had just ended, or maybe something had just been left behind. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then, almost instinctively, he looked at his watch. 9:16 p.m., his heart skipped slightly. 1 minute. Ethan turned toward the window, toward his apartment. The chair, the place he always sat. 9:17, the window stayed dark. Of course it did. He wasn't there. Ethan stood still for a moment. Then, without fully thinking about it, he reached for the light switch beside the door. His hand paused, just for a second. Then he flipped it. The room filled with that same warm, golden glow. Soft, steady, familiar. Ethan looked back at the window. And there, across the street, for the first time, his own apartment was the one in the dark. And this one was the light. The light felt different from inside. Ethan noticed it immediately. From across the street, it had always seemed distant, like something gentle but unreachable. Something separate from him. But standing here, inside it, it felt warm. Not just physically, but emotionally. Like stepping into a moment that had been waiting. He stood near the switch for a while, his hand still resting against the wall. As if turning it off too soon might undo something important. Across the street, his apartment sat in darkness. Still, quiet. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't there. And yet, somehow, he didn't feel as alone as he expected. Ethan walked slowly back toward the window, each step measured, thoughtful. He looked out, at the building he knew so well. At the chair where he had spent so many nights trying not to think, trying not to feel. It looked different from here, he whispered. Smaller, more distant. Like something from a past version of himself. He leaned lightly against the glass. I was there every night, he said quietly. And you were here. No answer, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt understood. Ethan turned slightly, glancing back at the apartment, at the notebook resting on the table. He walked over, picked it up again. This time, instead of flipping through old pages, he turned to a blank one. His fingers lingered for a moment, as if unsure whether he had the right. Then he found a pen, sat down. For a long time, he didn't write anything, just stared at the page, listening to the quiet. Then finally he began. I noticed. He paused, looked at the words, simple, but true. He continued. I didn't know why it mattered at first. The pen moved slowly, carefully, but it did. He exhaled softly. It made the nights feel less heavy. A small pause. Less empty. His chest tightened slightly as he wrote. I think I needed it too. Ethan stopped. His eyes rested on the sentence for a while, then he added one more line. I hope you knew that. The pen lifted from the page. The room felt still again, but not in the same way as before. Now it felt complete. Ethan closed the notebook gently. Set it back where he had found it. For a moment he just sat there, letting everything settle. Then he stood, walked back toward the window. The light reflected softly in the glass now, blending with the view outside. Across the street, his apartment remained dark, but it didn't bother him anymore, because for the first time he understood something. The light had never really been about the window. It had been about connection. Two people, separate, unknown to each other, still choosing in their own quiet way to show up every night. Even without words, even without names, Ethan looked down at the street below, cars passing, life continuing, then back at the reflection in the glass. You weren't alone either, he said softly. And this time he believed it. The minutes passed quietly, uncounted. For once he wasn't watching the clock. Eventually, Ethan walked toward the door, paused. He turned back one last time. The room, the light, the notebook, all of it still, all of it holding something real. Then he stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. The hallway felt less heavy now. The stairs easier to walk down. Outside, the night air met him again. Cool, calm, Ethan crossed the street slowly. When he reached his building, he stopped, turned, looked up, the window. Still glowing, 9:32 p.m. later than usual, but steady, still there. Ethan stood for a moment longer, then nodded slightly to himself, before heading inside. That night, for the first time in a long time, he didn't sit by the window. He didn't wait for 9:17. He didn't need to, because somewhere across the street, the light was already on. And this time, he knew exactly what it meant. The end.